This is Optometrists Building Empires, and I'm your host, Ankit Patel. Each week, we'll explore the journey of multi-practice ownership and leadership in optometry. Join us for insights and strategies from the top minds in our field. This show is sponsored by My Business Care Team. My Business Care Team helps your office increase revenues, reduce costs, and reduce staffing headaches. Let's build your empire together. Today's guest is going to be a special treat. She's an optometrist that believes wholeheartedly in giving honest feedback. She's a practice management consultant and an executive leadership coach through her company, Leaders of Vision, where she focuses on clients' individual goals and values to help them succeed. She finds great fulfillment in facing the challenges that come from assisting others' practices on their journey to success. She's the co-owner of Somerset Eye Care and Metuchen Vision. She's Dr. Bethany Fishbein. Bethany, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much, Ankit. I'm excited to record with you.
Yeah, thank you. I'm excited too, because I think you bring a really unique perspective. And, with that, I'm curious, what was the most important thing that helped you grow your empire?
It's such a fun thing to think about because I think that 1997, me graduating from optometry school, could not have even imagined where this journey would take me. And one of the most influential conversations along the way that I remember was really just the introduction to the idea that this could be done. Because when my husband and I started thinking about opening our own practice, we had absolutely no idea what was possible. We hadn't even thought about it. So when we thought about practice, we thought about what everybody else seemed to have or seemed to be wanting at the time. A practice generating a couple $100,000, we would maybe take 100,000. This was, 2000. So it was years ago. But we thought that that's what success looked like. And I remember telling those goals to a consultant who we had worked with at the time. And he said, "What do you want?" And I gave him this grand vision that we had of this practice, making maybe $350,000. We could take 100. And he thought about it for a second and he said, "Okay, we could do that. What do you want to do the second year?" And Jonathan, my husband, and I were like, minds blown. I was like, "What do you mean?" And he had little tidbits. He used to say, "Oh, the first million is easy. You should kind of get that just for showing up." And it fully reset what I even thought to want. And I think that was probably the first step, is knowing that an optometrist could build an empire if they wanted to. And that empire was bigger than what I had imagined up until that point.
Yeah. So if I'm hearing correctly, your most important thing was a mind shift change. Is that is it possible to even do? Is that the biggest thing that contributed to
I think so, right? It was like in that moment, I didn't even think that optometrists built empires. They built offices. The optometrist I went to growing up, the office was a single room in the basement of his family home, and he used to go to use the bathroom, and you'd go up and you'd kind of wave at his wife who's cooking in the kitchen. And that's what optometry was to me. So that's just what I thought to want. And yeah, I guess it was a mindset shift, like, there's something different out there.
I think there's so much to that, like having a model that shows, hey, it can be done, whether it's someone that you. So from my understanding, it's a model that you can actually feel is doable, right? That you feel like, oh, I had this shift, but that's not me, right? I can never do that. Versus saying that, oh yeah, I could do that. So that was interesting how you said something really interesting. Your consultant you're working with, he's like, "What do you want to do the second year?" That was really cool, because it's like, okay, that's step one. Now let's talk about the next step. It's a 1,000 journey step, probably what you got to hear.
Right.
But he didn't say, "Oh, you're going to be like multi-practice owner, have your own clients on your own consulting business." He said, "What's after year one?" Because $1 million is pretty feasible for showing up. but then how do you want to grow from there? So tell me about how that manifested for you, like in step by step. Like, where do you think you saw some? Oh, you know what? I might have made a different choice here if I hadn't had that mindset change.
Ooh, I probably a million different ways, but one of the things that having that bigger, broader idea of goals changed for us was just in our first year of practice. The I kind of knew that after your first year, then your second year, you would set a goal to grow a certain percentage over the first year. And then a third year, you grow a second, another percentage over the second year. And so as a brand new practice owner, really got into the mindset of whatever we do in this first year is super important because that's what we're building on. And so if we're going to have a 20% increase in year two, I get to decide now 20% of what. So we really focused in on marketing, patient generation, like how big could we make this year one? And we're fortunate enough to, my husband was working in another practice at the time. And so everything that we made, it was like, okay, this was our profit. Let's put that back into marketing. And this is, again, it's a long time ago. So this was direct mail. So it was um, an easy correlation, like $1. Okay, we could send 2 letters. So, all right, we made $1,000. Wow, we could send 2,000 letters. And just knowing that every letter we sent, every interaction we had that led to a patient coming in was something that the next year we're going to build on, build on, build on. The
Mhm.
cost of acquisition the first year, I mean, it might be break even, right? Sometimes you even
Yeah.
lose, but you're not just getting that patient, you're getting that patient, you're getting their family, and potentially you're getting that patient, their family, future generations, and all of their referrals, hopefully, if you do a good job for life.
Yeah.
So it really gave us the ability to look at year one as a building block for whatever we wanted to do in the future.
That's really cool because I imagine that if you just saw it as a $200,000 practice, it would have been like, you know what? Why do we need to spend the money? We're already here. We can just enjoy it. Versus investing into the future. And it's interesting. You said something. Another guest of ours, Doctor, I think Tony Turin. He's out west. He said something that I really liked. He said, you know, it's a lot of it's about just doing few things really well and compound interest over time. And so
Yeah.
if you kind of mentioned that, like, look, if we get these patients now, we're going to have them hopefully for a lifetime and multiple generations of lifetimes if we do a really good job. And so I really like that compound interest thought process.
Yeah, we never actually physically did it, but always in my head, I had kind of this vision of a wall mural
Mm.
with patient names and the, the, tree, I guess, of
Mhm.
patients that they created. And I had worked in a practice previously, so I kind of had seen this in action, but you see one patient and I can think about families, actual people in my head right now where we saw somebody, we did something unique, showed them something new, just took
Yeah.
really good care of them. And that one person has probably generated, like, through their own family and then referrals and then kids who are now bringing their own kids and like it could be one person has generated 40 patients for the practice. And if you tie dollars to those patients, it just gives you a very different thought process to how meaningful is this one patient in my chair right now.
Yeah.
And you don't know necessarily which patient that's going to be.
Mhm.
So you have to treat them all as if they could be the next one at the top of the chart on the wall with the branches and the trees of what they've generated.
I,
But
I, yeah.
it's fascinating.
I love that way of thinking. I'm gonna geek out a little bit with that.
Okay.
My background's in engineering a little bit. Does it I imagine it follows maybe a power law or log normal distribution, statistical distribution, right? So like, 80/20 rule basically. Is that what you find roughly with the patients or?
Not an engineer, but mom of an engineer. So he can listen to this and then he'll call me and explain exactly what you meant. He'll mansplain it for me.
Fair enough.
But yeah, right. It's not all of them. Like it might be 20% of the patients. I haven't done the actual statistics to know, but it's absolutely a small minority.
Mhm.
But that minority, like if you hadn't met that one person or something went wrong in that one transaction or you weren't able to bring your best self to that encounter and they left feeling meh, that's maybe over a lifetime, tens of thousands of dollars
Yeah.
in practice revenue. And honestly, the missing out on the ability to create some pretty cool and special relationships.
Yeah, and I like the way you're framing this, and let me back up a second, make sure I understand this. So you hear a lot of times, and a lot of our guests have talked about specialization, they've talked about, just taking care of the patient. What you're saying is, yes, take care of the patients, practice how you wanna practice, and understand that there, is a relationship tree that let's call it 5% of the patients, 5 to 10%, which is more of a what's called I think that's closer to power law distribution, if your engineering son can correct me on this one. My background is in engineering, but it's been a while since I've done any of this. But so let's say it's 5 like 100 patients, let's say about 5 of them probably are the ones that are gonna be these super referrers. 1, you have to have a way to you make it easy for them to refer people and tell them that you're okay with that, right? But 2, it's how do you, create that environment that enables that? And then it's almost like that is a big it sounds like that's a big part of how you grow. Like, that's a growth strategy for you, right? It sounds like. Is that am I hearing that correctly?
It was. And at the time it wasn't anything intentional. It's just what what we were able to bring to the practice. So you do hear a lot about specialization and, this instrument and that instrument. And there are things that you have that nobody else has. But I would say that people who are referring their entire family and you can't see anyone else but, it's not so much what you're doing, it's who you are, right?
Mm,
I think. Um, and the experience that they get. And so as we evolved as practice owners, the things that I was exposed to and really got interested in were customer experience,
mm,
what businesses were doing outside of optometry to create an environment. Um, just a lot of the content that I was following, that I was interested in, was learning from hotels, learning from Disney, learning from every business that I went into, restaurants, right? What are they doing? What are they creating? And never really saw the optometry practice as like, okay, this is a place where we're going to do eye exams and prescribe eyeglasses. Like, yeah, we do that. But it was here's what we're creating, like the space for patients to come in. This is how they're going to be treated. This is how they're going to be taken care of. And as I'm thinking about it, as I'm saying this and remembering the early days, that's been one of the big challenges as a practice grows. It gets harder.
yeah. Yeah, absolutely, and, real quick, I'm curious, have you ever quantified how much one of those super refer patients are worth to the business? Or just take a ballpark and scale. I'm curious because everyone has average per patient, right? National average per patient is around 300-ish. But, if one person refers 10 people, technically, they're not just doing their 300, but they're bringing another 3,000 in, right? And
Right. And
those people that
then
refer, yeah.
and they refer. And
Yeah.
I mean, the one that stands out to me is a patient I recall, and she saw us initially. We have a low vision specialty, and we'd seen her as a low vision patient, and so the dollars and cents are a little bit different. But this is somebody that we have seen for close to 30 years, and like just her, it's not about that. It's not about lifetime value of a
Yeah.
patient, but when you think about that, it's kind of like, whoa, like, yeah, I haven't done the math because I just haven't. And
Yeah.
I don't know. It's more fun, I guess, existing in my head, but it's a lot.
Well, it's interesting because I think the conventional knowledge or conventional wisdom is butts in the seat, right? Like volume, 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 faster, more production, few lower time. But what I'm hearing from you is, hey, no, there's a way to look at it financially where a little bit more extra time, a little TLC, if that is your internal value of connecting with patients, taking care of them, by doing this, you can frame it a different way and put structures and things in place to support it financially. But it's a way that you can still meet your end goals, but without having to increase necessarily or sacrifice patient care and increase volume.
Right. And that goes to what the owner wants. So I'm assuming because we're talking on your podcast, people are interested in building empires, but not like that's not everybody's end goal. I remember a friend who became a client and is a client and friend, but one of the first things she said to me when we were starting to work together, she said, just to make it clear, I have no desire to be you. And I said, what do you mean? And she said, I don't want the practice you have. I don't want work to have the place in my life that it has in your life. Here's what I want. And I want to leave at the end of the day. I want to go out on my boat. I want to hang out with my wife. I want to do stuff. And for me, that was really a moment of, okay, it's not my goal to help her get what I think is best practice. It's my goal to help her get the practice that serves her life the way that she wants. And I think that that's one of the areas that makes me uncomfortable a little bit with all of the advice that's out there. It's all assuming that you want, more money, more patience. And that's not what everybody wants.
Yeah. I think that's really good insight because when we talk about building an empire, there's a lot of different ways to do it. And that's one of the I love this business because there's so many different ways you can practice. And it's
Yeah.
really neat to hear that you're kind of seeing that on your consulting practice. In addition to, hey, just because I built it this way, in your consulting practice, you're like, well, no, the what you've kind of seen a way to kind of merge it and shift it to what the individual doctor or doctors want to get out of it.
Yeah. Because an empire in quotes, I guess, where the king or queen usually gets to show up to work 4 days a week and leave at 3 o'clock and be walking distance from their house to take their dog to work and get their kids off the school bus and makes enough money to do all of the things that they want to do. That's not the worst empire
Yeah.
for
Yeah.
somebody who sees the fun and growth and being the biggest and, you know, wanting to hit 12 million just because somebody else they know hit 10, like, then they're not going to be content with that. And that's the fun of it.
That sounds uh it's a very wise approach, it sounds. And let me ask you a question. We're talking a lot about your successes. What'd you run into that you didn't expect as you were growing? Maybe when you went to 2 locations or when you started expanding.
Great question. There have been a bunch of them. Um, I think one of the things that we ran into was I don't know how to say this, but I guess it's like a different side to some people than we had ever expected.
Hmm.
Like, I think that I grew up with a fair amount of privilege. I trusted everybody. The world was a pretty great place. And so everybody in it was good. And as a new business owner, I believe that. And so as the practice grew and we started staffing, we started to have staff and started to trust people.
Mhm.
It was a very painful, eye-opening lesson for me that not everybody should be trusted, right? Not everybody deserves that trust. And navigating a situation where um, somebody was not a good person and worked like had fun creating harm
Mm.
was really, really tough in the moment and also tough after, because it was way more fun to think that everybody was good. And so how do you generally get back to that? So that's something that honestly I feel I was a little bit blindsided by as a amateur business owner. Um, that was something unexpected.
Yeah.
I think something else that I'm aware of now as a less young business owner that um, I wasn't expecting was the just the constant evolution, like how how much the owner's mindset impacts day to day to day, the mood in the practice, the feel of the practice, and how everybody else responds to it. It's something that I didn't think much about until I started to see it in myself and in clients, right? When I'm struggling, um, all of a sudden everything's terrible and everything's awful and everybody else is like, oh, everything's bad. Like that level of responsibility of the leader to set the tone of the business and to be honest. So it's not about hiding concerns, but it's about being able to share concerns honestly in a way that conveys the appropriate amount of panic and not what you might be feeling in the moment, but isn't really the real situation. I think has been a constant challenge to overcome for me because I just, I'm feeling what I'm feeling and I put it out there and I've had to work at how to show up the way that I want to and have that self-awareness.
And we've had other guests in the past also talk something similar, like, "Hey, or it was like some of the mistakes, was not the same exact story, but something in this. I'll call it like it kind of rhymes with it. They say that I expected people just to be able to do their job and just
Yeah.
get it done, right, regardless of external circumstances. And you said something interesting. I heard somewhere that the culture of a company is led by the leader and founder until they get to about 200 people. And then it really starts to become its own thing. But I don't think there's very many people listening to this that are at that level. And so I think it's kind of interesting that you picked up on that as an insight that it affected people so much. Can you share maybe a little story about like almost a before and after? Like, hey, this is what happened when I was doing it this way, and then I changed it another time, and this is what the outcome results were. Is there anything that comes to mind that was like, oh, you know what? When I made that change, I saw an impact, and this is how I saw it.
I guess I'm trying to think of a big story and it it's not really a big story. It's like little stories day
Yeah.
after day after day. So, we had a staff meeting 2 days ago, and the day before that, I had some emergency dental work, and I had a bad headache, and I just, I wasn't feeling great. So, we have a staff meeting, and I didn't feel great at the end of it. I was like, "How come that staff meeting didn't feel right?"
Yeah.
And, um one of our practice managers said to me after, I said, like, "Oh, I didn't feel great about that the next day." And she's like, "Yeah, I was going to talk to you about that." And I was like, "What did you notice?" Right.
Mm.
And she said, um, it was like first one of the year. We were sharing some accomplishments. And she said, people put accomplishments that like deserve some praise and attention.
Mm.
And you were like, "Oh, yeah. Okay, great. You did that. Oh, yeah. You got certified a medical assistant. Good job."
Yeah. Yeah.
And I was like, I totally did.
Yeah.
And it just sets the tone. So the days that um, a leader is struggling, it might not even have to do with the office. It might have to do with something outside.
Because I want to point out something that you may not have noticed there, but your manager came to you because you had set a certain tone. It's like, hey, you were off. It's like
Yeah.
we need to make sure that we don't want to lose our culture. We don't lose our people. We don't lose the excitement and energy. um, you know, let's come back and maybe fix this or like do something special or something, right? I don't know what you guys decided to do after that, but I think that's really insightful. And I'll share with you something that I was I had studied on, and there's actually there's been studies done on positivity and making sure the work environment, right? And so they took like 60 teams and they categorized them in high, medium, and low performers. And they found the one variable that made the most difference was the number of positive comments to negative comments. And it was a direct correlation between the performance and how much they said. So the poor performing teams, I'll give the audience a second to guess what the ratio is. How many positive comments and negative comments do you think they averaged? Right. You're welcome to guess if you want, but
I have no idea.
that's fair. It's actually 1 to 3. So
Hmm,
one positive comment to 3 negative comments. The medium
interesting.
teams were closer to 1 to 1 or 1 to 2. And the high performing teams were 1 to 3 to 1 to 9,
Wow.
or 9 to 1. Sorry, 9 to 1 or 3 to 1. So they had like nine. Some of them had as many as 9 positive to 1 negative. The average being around 6. So six positive to 1 negative average. So it
Yeah.
just makes such a big difference in performance. It's hard to see that because it's like a compounding returns. It builds day in and day out. Maybe you didn't see a direct impact today, but your long term, your staff is developing that you want. They're getting certifications, right? They feel comfortable to stay along with enough with you to get a certification because they feel like there's path there because of that environment, right? Versus another environment that might be like, oh man, doc is going to fire me if I don't do my job. So I don't know if I have stability here, right? It's a different environment that's created.
Yeah, it's absolutely. And I see that. I've gotten certified with as an emotional intelligence practitioner and do an emotional culture survey with practices. And so this is very similar to what you're talking about. Like the research behind it is, people in high performing workplaces are feeling much more, uh, feeling positive emotions much more frequently, negative emotions much less. And it is fascinating to actually correlate numerical results with what a practice owner is saying about their team. It's like, you know, we're just struggling. I feel like any new thing I introduce, I can get it through. Like, we
Yeah.
just don't do new stuff. Every day is a challenge. Everything's like giant mountain. And you look at the results and you're like, okay, here's why. It's like right there. And it's hard as a practice owner to have and feel the responsibility of how much your persona creates or uncreates that on a daily basis. Like
Yeah.
as you're reflecting back to me what I said about this meeting, and I'm sitting here and I'm thinking, okay, but I had one bad day. I'll get my tooth hurt. Like I didn't ruin it,
Yes.
but it's like you feel the weight of that sometimes, and it's heavy.
Yeah. I apologize. Didn't mean to say you ruined it, but
I
if I did, I
can take
apologize.
it.
It's
I
more
feel
just
much
like, hey,
better today, so I'm good.
well, your staff felt comfortable enough to tell you like something was off, which I think that was a huge cultural win. So you've done enough to put, deposits in the bank that we're like, yeah, hey, you know what? We should change something here. But um, so I, and one of the reasons I was really excited to talk to you too, because you have a really unique perspective because you actually work with other doctors as well in
Yeah.
your consulting practice. So shifting gears a little bit, tell me a little bit about what you see as the main reason for success for a lot of your clients. And if you can, think of the ones that go to from one to multiple, or like maybe 2 to 3, or grow multiple locations. What do you see as some of the common threads there that leads to their success from your perspective as a consultant?
Ooh. Um, the first thing that's popping into my mind when you ask the question is the idea of assumption of responsibility for their own success. If I had to say the biggest difference I see between really successful practices, whether that's multiple multiple locations, multiple millions of dollars, or just not having that, but having exactly what I want, and practices that are struggling, it's the owner taking responsibility to say success is something that I create or don't. I know that I am in the driver's seat, and what happens from here is up to me. The good stuff I get credit for, the bad stuff I got to figure out to fix. But ultimately, it comes down to me. And when they have that mindset, they just, they can do anything because they try something, it doesn't work. They say, okay, I own it. didn't work. Let's try something else. I fix it. I'm driving. Where on the other side, it's this happens to me. This employer in my area switched to a lower paying plan. Reimbursements haven't changed in 30 years. Staff sucks. Everybody's dumb. Like it's night and day difference. And that's the biggest difference I see.
Yeah, even like, "Oh, I wasn't supposed to do that. Oh, that's why I hired this person to do this job." So, it was
Right.
supposed to be they're supposed to be doing it. Yeah, I was like, "Well, maybe, but, that's you gotta eventually change that person out if they're not doing their job properly."
Exactly.
But you gotta be able to give them a fair chance and coach them too, so.
Right. And that's when I see practices, I think about practices that have shifted,
Mm.
like started really struggling and then ended up being really successful. That's probably the biggest shift that's going to be a predictor of that. Like going from that victim, um, that victim place
Yeah,
to I'm in control and it might not be going the way I want it. So I'm in control. Let's make it go a different way.
I like that. Now, do you find I'm curious, do you find that, like, let's say there's multiple owners in a practice, do you find that, you need, a certain percentage of the owners? Is it if it 1 out of maybe 2 or 3 people are bought in, it works or it doesn't? Like, how does that work with, like, when you have a group of people in there? Or maybe, I don't know, husband and wife team or something like that,
You know,
like
nothing.
yourself, right? So, I'm curious how that goes. And like myself too, my wife and I.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That introduces a whole different dynamic, I think, and this is, some personal experience, and I'm thinking about some client groups that are partners, or I do end up with husband and wives
Mm.
because I like that. Either one person can be into it if the role is understood that that's their job to be into it, and the other one's gonna hang on for the ride, right? That's okay. If they have equal responsibility for leading and setting culture and creating goals and all of that, and one's into it and one's not, that's that's where it gets really tough, almost impossible. So I think one person can be the most excited, can be the driver, can be the visionary, um, as long as everyone else is good with that and wants that. Two drivers driving in opposite directions is gonna be frustrating for everybody involved.
And I've seen in some partnerships where one person's like, "Yeah, I'll ride along," and then they kind of sabotage. They're
Yeah,
like, "Well, no, I don't think it's a good idea." Or I was like, "I really don't wanna do that." And it's like, "Well, no, it was my decision to drive this, like, kind of agreed to buy into this direction." I've seen that a couple of times too. How do you is that something you've seen as well? That type of situation?
I think I see it daily,
Yeah.
and, um, my husband will say it. He says, "Well, my role is to poke holes in everything.
Yeah.
You know how I am. I just, I'm gonna find the thing that isn't gonna work." Right? So, for us, it's been a little bit of a learning process to understand that ultimately, you're better off for having that, but you have to come to not see that as personal criticism. It's not a relationship issue. It's like, okay, this is going to be my job. You're going to say this thing, and I'm going to say, well, what about this, 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 and this?
Mhm.
And I've got to stop and say, what about those? All right, good point. And then you get through that, and then you can do it anyway.
Nice.
So it's figuring out roles. Like it's not. It feels like sabotage when it's happening. But if you have the knowledge and trust that you want the same thing, you want to end up in the same place, then when something feels like sabotage, you got to think, okay, wait a minute. Why is he digging his heels in on this one? Why does this feel so wrong here? There's something I'm not seeing or I'm not thinking about or I'm not giving as much weight as I should be. So let's figure out what that is.
Gotcha. That's good for some of the folks who are in partnerships out there. It's just good insight. So real quick, a lot of folks are dealing with current challenges with staffing and reimbursements. Curious, how are you dealing with it, and how do you see your clients dealing with it? What are some common themes or tricks or tips and things that you're finding that are helping you manage staff costs?
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure you're seeing it because it's what you've built your business on, but reliance on a virtual team has been tremendous and game changing for our practice and for many, many of the practices that I work with. And it's something that I've spoken on and given content on. And, you know, like it's funny to me now when I see online somebody saying, has anyone actually used a virtual? I'm like, oh my
Like
gosh,
2024,
like, is anyone
2025?
not?
Yeah.
Right. So I think that that's been a really tremendous way for us. I think also the idea of simplifying and streamlining, is there a different way to do something that doesn't require the same level of manpower? Because the reimbursements aren't changing. Maybe you don't want to necessarily see more patients. You can add a specialty and things like that, but there are a lot of practices that are collecting the same amount of money they've been and are spending more
Mm,
because staff, want to make more and everything costs more. So if you don't have the top line growth to keep up with the pace that people want to be raised at, et cetera, you've got to think about something different. And so, things like the kiosks the at Panera and the fast food restaurants, like being able to order on your phone in optometry world, having a portal so that patients, you're not constantly answering the phone of, can I get this information? Allowing patients to schedule online. Like, how can you take a job and make it easier so that the people who are there can take care of patients
yeah.
and some of the back work is taken off of their plates. And I know that's what you do for people as well.
I appreciate that. Yeah, um, that's the way I like to call it is like global resourcing is like, find the best person for the job around the world, right? Does it really have to be within your four walls? A lot of positions, yes. Some positions, not necessarily. So,
Yeah,
and
we saw that one. I think about it now. I think, wow, I was ahead of my time. But we had a
uh,
virtual employee, I think 20 years ago, and she was US based, but she was somebody that I had met online, and her husband was a pilot, and so they moved frequently, and it was hard for her to find a job. And so we figured out how she could work remotely. And at that point, we had grown, and we needed somebody else, and it was just physical space. There wasn't anywhere for them to sit.
hmm,
And so I was like, all right, I think I found somebody, but they won't need a place to sit. That was all it was. But she was part of our team for over 10 years.
wow, that's pretty incredible. And it's funny because that's actually the other reason, like, especially in dense populated cities where you don't have a lot of square footage, it makes a lot of sense to not have people in the office. Now, they can be wherever they want them to be. They could be working from home in the same city if you wanted to, but
Yeah,
it makes a big difference.
for sure.
Yeah. So I'd like to maybe shift gears just a little bit and talk about you personally.
Okay.
And I'd like to know what makes Bethany Bethany, right? Can you think of maybe like one or two really seminal, impactful moments in your life? You kind of hinted at one at the very first question of the consultant and what's possible, your mind shift with practices. Is there another moment in your life that was something similar that formed you to who you are today? Could have been something in like third grade, or it could have been in college, or it could have been more recently. Um, what do you think that visceral story would be that you'd share with us that made you who you are?
I'm going to go with summer camp. Um,
Okay.
and I can hear the people who know me, if they're listening to this, rolling their eyes and saying one time at band camp. And it's not that. But when I was in college, I had no idea what I wanted to do. But I knew once I lived away from home a freshman year of college that was, I didn't want to go home for the whole summer. So I had answered a classified ad in the newspaper, aging myself, and it was lifeguard needed at camp for blind children.
Okay.
And I didn't know anything about blind children, but I was a lifeguard and it was an overnight camp. And I thought, great, this sounds perfect. So I got that job and ended up working there for a couple, 5 summers. And I think that a couple of really big things that I got from that is one is that's what led me into optometry. That was my introduction to the world of visually impaired people
Mm.
and them as people, not as eye diseases or diagnoses. Although we got our ophthalmoscopes one summer that I was there, and so like the first bunch of eyes I looked at all had like crazy stuff in them, but it led me to my career. It was where I was exposed to the importance of leadership as a role. Like if I think about the leaders who've had impact on me as a leader, I think about the camp director doing that. And it also created for me an environment where work and the relationships of work were so much fun that we had weekends off and we did stuff together. Like it was people working together for a common goal and having a ton of fun doing it. And that defined for me what I wanted work to feel like forever.
Yeah.
And things that I took from those summers and people that I know from those summers are still things that impact me today.
Wow. That's pretty neat. That's
Yeah,
so
super neat.
you found your life purpose in that one summer. That's really cool.
Yeah. And it was like, it was completely random. Like I just, sleepaway camp. I grew up as a camp kid
Yeah.
and the team, the environment, to still be in touch with so many people and to hear their stories of how influential that time was for them and where they ended up. It was just one of those things.
That's cool. Um, so now you're further in your career now, and you have a lot more wisdom. What would you give your younger self as a piece of advice 4 days after you graduate OD school?
4 days after I graduated OD school, I think, well, I don't know. I think to my younger self, the advice that I would have given myself is to maybe chill out and enjoy the ride a little bit more. I actually, 4 days after I graduated OD school, I was working. 4 days before I graduated OD school, I was working because the practice that I was going into, the doctor had gone out for a surgery and they were like, can you work? And I was working under supervision, but it was like,
Mm.
I missed our week, like class week before graduation because I was working and just had a work ethic. It created what I have now. So I wouldn't go back and change it, but I would maybe say, you know what, spend the money, take the trip, balance a little bit more.
Okay.
I wish I had found that earlier.
Yeah, and I imagine a lot of your consulting clients, you might, depending on what their goals are, that might be something that comes up now that you have that insight.
Yeah, and sometimes they're surprised to hear, right? Because from a business consulting perspective, when somebody says, my schedule is so slow, not always, but sometimes the answer is, well, that sounds like a great excuse to take a day off,
Yeah,
right? Not everybody, it's very individual. You can't always get there.
yeah,
They're like, what?
yeah,
Like, you've been talking about burnout, you've been complaining about this, you've been saying you just needed a morning to get coffee, go for a walk, get a massage, get your nails done, whatever. Like, if your schedule is empty just this once, go ahead and block out a day. If you're only going to see 80% of the patients you could see anyway, you might as well see them in 4 full days and get that extra day for yourself.
yeah.
So sometimes that is practical. And I did not know that when I started.
Mm. That's good insight. I feel like we could go a lot further and a lot deeper here, and I think we might have to bring you back for a second round of interviewing and maybe dive deeper into some tactical things for
Uh,
location practices.
yeah, thank you. Thank you for your good questions. And you're making me think today. I like it.
That's good. So, Bethany, where can people connect with you if they wanted to get in touch?
So people can connect with me through my website, leadersofvision.com. There's a contact me with my email, Bethany at leadersofvision.com. I'm happy to connect with practice owners and just hear and see what people are going through, be able to give a little bit. And I find that I am constantly learning too from every practice that I'm working with.
That's good. That's good. Well, thank you for that. And thank you again, Dr. Bethany Fishbein, for being a guest.
My absolute pleasure. Thank you.
Yeah, and thank you, audience. And if you learned something today, laughed, or found something really interesting, subscribe and share the video or the podcast, whichever one you're looking at. And thank you again, Bethany, for joining us. This has been another exciting episode of Optometrists Building Empires. We'll see you next time. That's a wrap on another episode of Optometrists Building Empires. Thanks for joining. For show notes and more, visit buildingempires.live. This show is proudly sponsored by My Business Care Team. My Business Care Team was born out of staffing challenges my wife and I faced together, managing multiple optometry locations. We refined our approach at Classic Vision Care and now offer our expertise to others. If you're experiencing challenges with staffing and you'd like to set up a discovery call, we'd be happy to help you and connect you with the right resources. We'll see you next time.